Good morning, I'm Craig Schaff, and it's really good to be here. I recognize some faces here, and we're going to talk about soil, and because Bob Gothard was not able to make it, I'm also going to do a session on pest and disease. The two topics really go well together, because if you understand the importance of soil, you'll find that a lot of your pest and disease problems will disappear. So if you were to define what soil is, you know, people call it dirt, some people call it soil. If we were to define what it is, if you go to your garden and you take a pint mason jar with a lid and ring and you put in, let's say, half of that jar, you take your garden soil and you put it in there, and then you put another, fill it up 3/4 full with water, and you shake that up. And you sit and shake that for like 2-3 minutes to get it all broke up really well. And then you sit that jar on your shelf and let it settle out for about 24 hours or more. And what you're going to see is you're going to see what your soil is made out of. All right? And the first thing that you're going to see when you set that jar down is any stones or any sand are going to settle very, very quickly to the bottom of that jar. The next thing you're going to see is you're going to see a dark layer of something called humus, okay, or some people would call it silt. That's going to slowly layer out in the water. And then after a long period of time, you're going to see just most Michigan soils, not all, but my soil would be the case for sure. I'm going to see just a really, really thin, tiny layer of clay, eventually, a kind of a whitish layer that's going to layer out right on the top. That's a really good way to test what your soil is. If you have a soil that is a beautiful, loamy, really nice soil that grows wonderful vegetables, you're going to shake that jar up and you're probably going to see that much sand, that much silt, and maybe about that much clay. You're blessed with a very, very good soil. But soil is more than just that. Okay, that's what you're able to see, and that's what you're able to perceive with your eyes, but soil is a lot more than that. In 1 teaspoon of really well-made compost, there's between 6 and 7 billion microbes and life forms, just in that 1 teaspoon. Now, we can't wrap our minds around that. In that population, that's as many humans as are on the earth, right? In that population, there's between 10 and 20,000 species of life forms. And as men and women, we don't even understand the tiniest fraction of how those life forms interact with one another. We're just starting to scratch the surface. And what you have to understand is plants in your garden are dependent. They're dependent on that life in the soil. Okay, a lot of the nutrients in the soil, a plant can't even uptake unless that life is present in the soil. Let me give you an example. In 1 cubic inch of soil, if your soil is well inoculated with mushrooms, okay, in 1 cubic inch, there's something called mycelia. Mycelia is the roots of a mushroom. You know, you walk out into the woods, how many of you hunt morel mushrooms? Okay? If you walk out in the woods, you know that about the time the ash trees are just starting to come to leaf. That's a really good hint, isn't it, for the white morels? Or you go and you find a dead elm tree where the bark is just starting to come off on this. Can you tell I've hunted morels before? You're hunting trees. You're not hunting mushrooms. If you're a good mushroom hunter, you're hunting trees. Why are you hunting trees? Because those mushrooms have a symbiotic relationship or possibly a parasitic relationship with that tree that you're hunting. Okay? But in 1 cubic inch of soil that's well inoculated with the root hairs of the mushroom, it's called mycelia, there can be 3 miles of hairs in that 1 cubic inch. So in 4 cubic inches, there's 192 miles of hairs. So if you're a Third Day Farm and you're making a soil block that's this big, and that soil block is made with something called leaf mold. Leaf mold is one of the ingredients that we put in our soil block mix, our planting medium. And the reason we do that is leaf mold is this. You take your leaves in the fall, you put them in a huge pile, make sure they're wet as you're piling them together. They'll become this airless mass that gets all weighted down. And the mushrooms, the mycelia, get in there and they turn that into just the most beautiful fudge, soft fudge consistency, black organic matter. Okay? And that is really key to a good soil mix. And the reason why is, now you got to understand this. You got to catch what I'm about ready to say. The reason why is 90% of the plants on planet Earth are in a symbiotic relationship with mushrooms. 90%. 50%, 40 to 50% have to have it. 90% will utilize it and need it. Okay? So what happens is if you go out to your garden and you see a mushroom in your garden and right away you're like, fungus. There's something called a fungicide. I guess I better use it because there's a fungus. So funguses are bad. So I'm going to spray this fungicide on my soil. What did you just do? You just killed the very thing that was aiding you. Now I'm going to switch gears there just a little bit to give you an illustration of something, okay? And if you can catch these things and you can apply them to your heart, you'll be very wise. I mean that. That's what wisdom is about. Wisdom is seeing truth. Wisdom is learning how to apply truth. Okay? For years, I went about my farm killing every wasp I could get my hands on in the spring. In the springtime, there'd be these paper wasp nests that would get started in our hoop houses and in our buildings, and I thought I was being such a great father going throughout our farm killing all these wasp nests because, we could get stung. What is prejudice? What is prejudice? How do you define prejudice? Prejudice is when you judge something before you have all the facts. Okay, so if you're going to go out and you're going to go throughout your farm and you're going to kill every wasp nest on your farm because you don't want to get stung, you're prejudiced. Here's why. So I've done this for a number of years, and one winter I'm sitting and I'm listening to a seminar put on by Jerry Bernetti. He was at the Organics Conference, the Moses Conference over in Wisconsin, and he was speaking. And he was talking about scents that plants can emit to communicate with insects and the science that's behind that. This thing was deep, the amount of information that this guy was giving. But he made a statement in this seminar where I just had to hang my head. And listen to what he said. He said, if a cabbage looper, you know what a cabbage looper is? That little green worm that gets on your cabbage and kale that just eats the leaf away. And if, it's fuzzy and super soft and easy to squish. That cabbage looper, the adult is that white butterfly you see fluttering through your garden. Okay? That cabbage looper, when it bites a cabbage plant, that cabbage plant can produce within seconds a scent that it'll emit into the air. And you know what is able to smell that scent? Of a paper wasp. That paper wasp can come within an inch or two on that plant of where that cabbage looper's at, and he'll grab that cabbage looper and take it back to his nest. Why does he need to do that? He needs to do that because for a paper wasp nest that's this big, they need between 1,000 and 2,000 larvae to parasitize, to kill, in order to feed their young. All right, so here I am. I've got this organic farm. I'm not interested in using sprays to kill bugs, okay? And I'm out here picking off these cabbage loopers off my cabbage. I'm prejudiced. Why was I prejudiced? I'm prejudiced because I don't have all the facts. I need wisdom. I need knowledge. I need to understand how all these things relate. If I don't understand how they relate, I'm shooting myself in the foot. So what did I do after I learned that? I let every wasp nest, I'm encouraging every wasp nest on my farm. And you know what's happened since then? Is I can do this. I can take you in July. I couldn't do it this year because we're resting our farm. We don't have crops on our farm this year. We're resting the land. We're giving it a Sabbath rest. But if I were to take you in July to our cabbage, I can almost guarantee you I can find 2 to 3 wasps during the heat of the day hunting those cabbage and kale. You know, the other thing that's really unique about cabbage, what does cabbage do with water really well? Have you ever noticed this? It holds the water. Have you ever noticed how after you water your cabbage, the leaf cradles that water and holds it? What do you think the wasps get? They come down, they get a drink. And because they find their water there, what are they? They're very close to the scent, and they pick up on it. And I can sit there on our store porch. I let 10 wasp nests go. This was like 2 or 3 years ago. There were 10 wasp nests, and the average nest was like this big. And I'd watch these wasps, and they would go out, and they'd come back with these cabbage loopers. I don't have a cabbage looper problem anymore, and I don't need to buy anything at the store. Okay, I have supplied to me everything I need if I encourage them to be present. Now, paper wasps are only one kind of parasitic wasp. There's a lot of kinds of wasps that are parasitic. If you plant parsnips, how many of you like to grow parsnips? Start to learn to grow parsnips. You'll grow more calories of energy per square foot with parsnips than anything else. If you want to grow calories, parsnips are the thing to learn. And the thing is, you can leave them in the ground all winter. And you can harvest them come spring. Okay? But parsnips, we grow them at our farm, and I grow them for seed. So in the fall, when I harvest my parsnips, some of them that we're going to eat, I'll pull all the parsnips, I'll look at them, all the roots that are the nicest roots, I replant. And those ones that I replant in an area that's about 6 foot by 6 foot wide. And in that 6 foot by 6 foot wide area, these parsnips come up in the spring, and they've got big, big umbels, they're called. They look like Queen Anne's lace, but they're really big like this, and they're round, they're greenish colored flowers. And any given day in the summertime when they're blooming, I can show you about 6 to 12 different species of parasitic wasps that are pollinating that. So because I have a pollen source in my garden, what happens? Those insects are entering my garden. What happens when they enter the garden? They're in all that scent zone. So what are they picking up on their way out? They're grabbing larvae, and when they grab pest larvae, they take them. Some of these parasitic wasps fly about 100 yards. They land on the side of a hill where it's sandy. They burrow into the side of the hill. They drag one of these worms in there. They sting it to paralyze it. They drag one of those worms in there. They lay their eggs on it. They cover it up. The warmth of the sun on that south-facing hill hatches those eggs, and they hatch again the next year, and the whole cycle continues. Are you following the importance of this? Yes. Now, what you need to realize is pest and disease, and I'm going to go through soil here, but I'm wanting you to see where we're headed. Pest and disease are not your enemy. You've got to get that out of your head. If you go to your garden and you see disease or pest and you think, oh, it's my enemy. No. They are an indicator that you have something out of balance. Okay? Go out to the forest and in the woods and show me how many times you can find plant populations that are so overwhelmed with pests and disease that there's no harvest there. It's very, very rare. In fact, most often, if it happens, you'll see something where man has intervened into the situation and messed things up when that happens. Okay? Now, I want to get back to soil. So in the soil, and this is our foundation of what we do is soil. If we don't get soil right, nothing else will be right. Does that mean then all soil that we have should be just the most lush, the most beautiful, the most mineral-rich soil that we can possibly come up with? Not necessarily. In fact, as Shirley talks later with herbs, you plant herbs in some of these super ultra-rich soils, they don't thrive at all. So your Mediterranean herbs, they like trash soil. I think they're one of the few plants that can really handle poor soils, but look where they grow in the world. So if you want to be wise, what you want to do is you want to look at what you're trying to grow and you want to see where it is in nature. If you were to walk out in the woods and you were to find leeks, ramps, wild leeks, what would you be seeing? You would probably be in something like an old growth type forest. The soil would be black and rich. It'd be beautiful soil. You'd have trilliums probably in the vicinity. You'd probably have some morels growing in the vicinity. You'd have beech. You'd probably have ash, large trees. I'm describing for you a habitat. I'm describing for you an ecosystem. And those leeks love that rich, rich soil. Well, guess what onions and garlic and stuff like in our gardens? Rich, beautiful soil. Now, what if you were growing blueberries? If you go out to the woods, what do you see when you're picking blueberries? What I see are bracken fern, I see pines, I see oaks, I see moss. If you're a blueberry picker, are you following what I'm saying? If you were going to make compost that would create the microbial life and the life of the soil that you're looking for blueberries, what kinds of things would you want to compost? You'd want to compost the kinds of things that the blueberries are living with out in nature where you see them, if you want them to thrive. Okay, so as you look at your garden and as you consider what you're going to nurture and what you're going to plant, try to find it in nature and say, this plant over here is thriving. Why is it thriving? What is with it? You know, men create what are called monocrops. A monocrop is what? Mono means one, singular. You know, we've got 1,000-acre fields of one crop, soybeans, corn, whatever it is. Show me anywhere in nature where that's the case. One guy got me one time with this. I was in Cadillac teaching a seminar, and he said to me, kudzu. You know what kudzu is? Kudzu is a plant that came from Japan that they transplanted for erosion control in the South. And there's no natural pests and stuff for it here in America. It takes over and it covers everything. If you've never seen a picture of kudzu in the South, Google kudzu and look at some of the pictures. There's a saying down south, if you stand still for 10 minutes, you'll get covered in kudzu. And it's amazing, the growth of this plant. And it's an excellent, excellent plant for making compost. It's an important plant. But it's out of its natural realm, and for that reason, because it's not planted where it's used to being in Japan, it gets totally out of control. But if you go into nature, you could go all the way to the edge of the Arctic, at the edge of the tree line, and I will tell you of a certainty you will find diversity. You will find a diversity of wildflowers that'll bloom for a matter of weeks like you wouldn't believe. You're going to find diversity. There's diversity everywhere you go. And whether you believe in creation or whether you believe in evolution, it doesn't matter. The fact that when you go out into the woods, the healthier the woods, the healthier the field, the healthier the situation that you're looking at, the more diversity there is. And the reason that is, and here's another thing of wisdom that you need to understand. Diversity is the key to resilience. Write that down. Diversity is the key to resilience. What is resilience? Resilience is if I have a ball in my hand, it's a rubber ball, and I drop it from here and it hits the ground and it bounces up about 4 or 5 inches or so. Is that ball very resilient? Not really. I'm not real impressed. I've had rubber balls that you drop them from here and they'll go past your hand. That's a resilient ball. It's the ability to bounce back. It's the ability, if you fall, you get up. Any of you ever fell in life? And you know, I mean more than just falling to the ground physically. We've all fallen, right? We've all fallen. And your ability to shake that off and get back up is what makes you resilient. And I'll guarantee you, if you have diversity of people in your life, if you have a diversified eating habit. Do you know most Americans eat the same 14 foods year-round, and that's their diet? The Hunza people in, where are they at? The Himalayas, they're some of the healthiest people in the world. They'll dance until they're 120 years old. To the grave, they practically dance. Okay, these are some of the healthiest people in the world. They eat between 200 and 300 different species of food every year. Diversity. Every plant, everything that you eat is made up of different chemical compounds and minerals and everything. And the more diversified your diet, the more diversified your soil, the more diversified the plants are going to be able to uptake. Okay, they've done studies at numerous research stations at Cornell, different universities, and they study crop rotation. Crop rotation is what? Rotating, so every year you plant a different crop in the same, like if I plant corn here this year, next year I'm going to plant potatoes. The year after that I'm going to plant, let's say, lettuce. The year after that I'm rotating crops so that I don't plant the same crop in the same place every year. Well, they've done research of rotations from the monocrop corn that is in the same field for 7 years, and then they go and they study a 2-year rotation, which means corn and soybeans, a 3-year rotation, which means you got 3 different crops that you keep rotating, all the way out to 7 years of rotation. And without fail, when they do the research, the further you go out and the greater your rotation is between crops, the more soil life there is, and the healthier the plants and the less pest and disease. And the same thing goes for your garden. The more diversity you can incorporate into your garden, and the more you can move it around and have it together, and the more sense. I mean, why are, companion planting, why is that so important at times? Because the scent of some of these strong smelling herbs and onions and things like that actually inhibit the pests from wanting to come. Okay? So diversity. So let's get back to soil now. Diversity in the soil. You can't see those 7 billion microbes, can you? You're not even going to know how they're interacting and stuff. So you really can't do a whole lot with your eyes to try to help them and interact with them unless you understand what it means to feed them and what they need to be nurtured. And we don't know a whole lot about that yet. And I think if we were to study for the next 1,000 years, we still wouldn't know a whole lot about it. It's that huge. It's that diversified. Okay? So, but does that mean that we can't do anything about it? No, because we know that the more diversity you have, the more diversity you plant in the soil, and the more diversity of things that you give addition to your soil, and we're going to talk about amending soil, the more the plants will thrive. Okay? I'm going to get a drink here real quick.
Are you drinking maple sap?
Someone asked me if I was drinking maple sap. Do you see that little tinge to the moonshine? Come on now. I thought this was the Wise Women program. It's actually a little bit of vinegar in there. Yeah. Now, soil, diversity in the soil. Okay, we talked about blueberries and how a blueberry soil is going to be entirely different than a leek soil. Okay, now those are the extremes. All right, most plants you can plant in a garden and they'll thrive pretty well together. Okay, there are some exceptions. There are some things like blueberries that really need more of an acidic soil. They're going to be more of a specialty crop. Okay, now this is an entrepreneurial program. So entrepreneurial means what? You're business people, right? You're starting a business. You're wanting to grow things, be able to sell it, be able to market it. I will tell you this. If Elliot Coleman, who was my mentor, who's been my mentor through books and stuff, I've been to his farm. He's in Maine. He wrote a book called 4-Season Harvest, another one called The New Organic Grower, and the other one is Winter Harvest Handbook. And if you're not aware of who Elliot is, I would encourage you to spend some time reading or watching a YouTube video or something of Elliot. He's very, very informative. He's a very, very good teacher, very inspiring.
What's his last name?
Coleman. Yep, Elliot Coleman. And Elliot, one of the things that Elliot really encourages and focuses on is the proper way to feed the soil. And I'm so appreciative of that. And when I first started gardening, my very first garden I had in the year 2000. Okay, I was 30 years old. I spent my youth as a professional fisherman. I made my living teaching people how to fish and traveling. I was on the first United States fishing team. I fished in the World Championship. My life consisted of fishing. That's what I focused on. I never thought anything about gardening. And then when I was in my 20s, I started working as a Finnish carpenter. And I made my living building homes and trimming houses and that kind of thing. And, if the Lord would have told me when I was 17 I was going to be an organic gardener, what would I have done? We all want a blueprint for our life, right? We just want to know what we're going to do. We want to run with it and make it happen. Well, God in His wisdom didn't tell me anything about this until I was 30, because He needed me to learn how to build things. He needed me to learn how to teach people by being a fisherman. Okay? So He had all these things lined up in my life for me to learn and to do to bring me to the point where now I'm ready to start learning to garden at 30 years old. Okay? So in these last years, when I first started, I started studying John Jevons and Elliot Coleman and some of these different authors. I was so fortunate. And the reason why is I didn't have an agricultural background, period. So I picked up Elliot Coleman's books and I started reading them, and it's like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. He's talking about nurturing the soil and nurturing plants and then nurturing people, because they take the food that you grow and they nourish themselves with it. Now, one of the comments he made in one of his books is, if you grow high quality food, you'll always have a market for it. You want to know what? He's absolutely right. If you grow high quality food, there will always be a market for it. Okay? Now I'm going to make some of you shudder and cringe here for a minute at what I'm about ready to tell you. Okay? But I get $7 a pound for the tomatoes that I grow on our farm. Okay? And some people are like, $7 a pound? That's gouging. That's highway robbery. You want to know what? Anybody who says that has never farmed. Farmers do not make enough money. Period. Farmers do not make enough money. Okay? Now, in the early 1900s, do you realize that 70% of men made their income from farming? And do you realize that 90% of the people were on the farm at that point? And of all those 90% of the people that were on the farm, do you realize also that 50% of their money that they had to spend was spent on food? You don't have to think very long and hard to realize that things were very different at another time. Now, today, what's the statistic? The statistic today is we spend 9% of our income on food, and less than 1% of our population are farmers. And you know how old those guys are? In their 60s. Pushing 63, 64, 65. I keep hearing different statistics of what the average farmer is, but they're wanting to retire. Okay, so what you have to understand is, how in the world did we go from having 90% of the people on the farm to 1% of the population being farmers? How was that even possible? How could that happen? It was called the Industrial Revolution. Okay, and what we did is we industrialized farming. Oil came on the scene, and oil fueled this growth in farming and this ability for just the tiniest fraction of our population to grow food. If you take a barrel of oil and you refine it to gasoline, you'll get about 34 gallons of gasoline. In that 34 gallons of gasoline, there's the same calories of energy as 12 men working 40 hours a week all year. Now what I want you to do is, I want you to hire 12 men, push your car 800 miles with all your luggage and totally maxed out with people, and I want you to have them push that vehicle. You know how long it's going to take them to push that car 1,000 miles? Yeah, about a year. Okay? So do you realize that if you're an oil company, I hear different estimates on this, but anywhere from $1 to $40 a barrel is what they spend to extract that oil out of the ground. Well, $40? Can you imagine hiring 12 men all year for $40? That's what we've been doing. So do you understand why the farmer can't compete now? Does the light gone on? Have you just had an aha moment? I'm telling you, farmers don't make enough money because you're competing with an agricultural system that specializes in turning out mass quantities of low-value food. And it's not feeding people. It's not nurturing people. It's not giving people what they need. And that's why you live in a country that's full of degenerative disease. 1 in 3 people are going to die of cancer. Why is that? Okay? Because we've not nurtured our soils. And I'm going to tell you how to nurture soil. Okay? And I'm not saying any of this to scare anybody. Okay? I'm hoping this is encouraging you. But I also want to share the truth with you because you're empowered by the truth, but you have to understand the truth to be empowered by it. Okay? So, how do you nurture the soil? The way you nurture the soil is with diversity. Sitting on a tractor, you can't create diversity. If your garden's as big as this room and you got a mammoth tractor that you're trying to do the work with, how in the world are you going to have any more than one species of plant growing in that field? It takes someone with the care of walking into the field and with their hands nurturing things independently and being there with the plants down at their level. That's how you nurture things. Okay? In the early 1900s, that's how things were taken care of. Okay, so we traded, and I was reading recently a book. I wish I could remember what book it was. But this older gentleman was talking about the collective sigh that you could hear in our culture in the 1930s and 1940s and 1950s when all this industrial revolution got ramped up and we started growing food and people weren't so pressured to grow their own food. And you know, farm life, you want to know what? It's sun up to sundown, folks. It is. It is. If you're going to nurture things, you know, I've got livestock. I try to nurture our dairy goats. Guess what? In the middle of the night, they don't always behave just the way you want them to behave. Okay? Things don't go according to plan all the time. You've got to be there for those animals. It's just like children. Why is it called being a husbandman? If you look at the old language of the husbandman, what's the husbandman? It's the nurturer. And, you know, the same thing's true of a woman that's going to husbandman or nurture plants. You got to be there for them. Okay, so you don't punch in and punch out with this gardening thing, with this farming thing. Okay? But if you can create really, really high quality food, why do I get $7 a pound for my tomatoes? I get this winter I got $4.25 a pound for my beets. The restaurant that I sell to can buy organic, local grown beets for 40 cents a pound. Why in the world would that chef pay me 10 times as much for my beets? Because their customers demand it. The salads that our beets and our tomatoes go on, I am told by the chef and by the different busboys and different people in the restaurant that people will order 2 of these salads and that's what they'll eat. And these salads aren't cheap. Okay, this is not a fast food restaurant we're talking about. They'll order 2 of them. Why? People in America are not used to eating mineral-dense food. When they eat something that's full of minerals, it excites their taste buds. If you eat a piece of fruit, if you bite into an apple and you're like, wow, I have not had an apple like that in so long, I can tell you of a surety you're eating an apple that was grown on very good soil. If you bite into an apple and it's just like, ugh, you're eating something empty. Your food should excite you when you eat it. It should. And it shouldn't have to be because of sprinkling a whole bunch of MSG and everything else on it. It ought to excite you because it's been grown in really good soil. The chef that I grow for, he doesn't care if I'm certified organic. Not that he wants chemicals on the food, but the reason he's been purchasing from me is because he wants something that his customers are going to talk about and they come back for. And that's the key. Okay? So, if you want to always have a market for your food, you need to grow something high quality. soil is the key. So let's talk about soil. Logan Labs, there's a soil test service here called Logan Labs. I'm going to share with you about a book that I think you all need to read. You might be able to get it through interlibrary loan. You could purchase it. The book is called The Intelligent Gardener by Steve Solomon. Steve Solomon is the gentleman that started Territorial Seeds years ago. And in this book, what Steve is wanting to do is he's wanting to teach you how to read a soil test. You know, a lot of people get a soil test and they're like, oh, what's all these numbers? What's this CEC thing? And what's all this? What's organic matter? And what's this? And what's that? All these percentages. And everybody's confused when they get the soil test. And if you were to ask different people how to interpret the soil test, you get different people telling you different answers, right? Okay, now, what he does is he takes you through and meticulously tries to teach you in layman's terms, this is what this is all about. This is what this means. This is the range that you're looking for with this. I would encourage you to read it and reread it and then read it again. If you read it and you don't pick up on it right away, just keep reading, pick up what you can, go back, start at the beginning again, and try it again. Just keep doing it. Because if you can understand how to nurture your soil, you're going to be light years ahead of everybody else. Guaranteed. Okay? And Logan Labs is a soil testing service that uses a type of test that Steve Solomon works with a couple different labs. One of the labs that he works with is Logan's. And the type of test that Logan Labs uses, if you take their numbers, there's a woman by the name of Erica. Is it Raymer? I can't remember her name. I think it's Erica. She works with Steve Solomon, and she has a website that you can go to where they have something called like an organic calculator. And what you can do for $10, you can get a subscription to this website. And you can go on it as many times as you want in a year. And what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to teach people, individual people, how to become a soil tester for your neighborhood. That's what he's encouraging you. Learn how to do it. Take soil tests for all your neighbors and help them amend their soil. It's a wonderful thing for wise women to grab onto and run with if you were to get the vision of what Steve Solomon's trying to teach. But what you do is, let's say your neighbor who knows nothing about soil tests totally, feels bewildered by the concept, takes and is willing to let you get a soil test done. You go get this soil test, you take responsibility, you have access for your $10 to go to this website. All you got to do is type their numbers into this website, and it'll give you a recommendation of what kind of organic amendments to put on to bring the soil into balance. I'll tell you what, after you've done that for them and they see what happens to their garden just 1 year, you will be the local hero. You will. Okay? So I would encourage you to step out and learn what you can about testing soil through that book and through that service on the internet.
What was the name of that service?
It seems like it's something like Abundant Life.
Abundant Gardens.
Grow Abundant Gardens. Yeah, she's got it right there.
Yeah, if you want to look at it, it's right there.
Yeah. So at any rate, so let's say you get this soil test, you send it in, you get your recommendation, and let's say your potassium is low, or let's say your phosphorus is low, say your calcium is low, or your magnesium, these different things. What do we add to the soil then to make the difference? Okay? In the industrial form of agriculture, we put extremely soluble forms of fertilizer down, whether it's nitrogen, potassium, or whatever it is, things that are very, very quick acting. You put them into the soil, and if it rains, what's going to happen? It's gone. It's gone. In fact, why are we seeing frogs with 5 legs? Why are we hearing things about blue baby syndrome? What's blue baby syndrome? Lots and lots and lots and lots of nitrates in the water. in the groundwater. You go into a lot of farming communities, even over by us, and in the spring, when all those nitrates get washed down into the aquifer, that water is dangerous to drink. Why? Because the nitrate is in such a water-soluble form, it just shoots right through the ground and goes in. Well, you see, why doesn't that happen out in the woods? Do yourself a huge favor. Learn to ask this question often. Why doesn't that happen in the woods? How come in a garden, your plants within a few weeks just go pale and stuff because they don't have enough nitrogen? But out in the woods, how come all the plants just don't go pale and die? Because no one's out there fertilizing them. How come we don't have to fertilize the woods? Diversity. Life, soil life. You've got diversity and you've got soil life present. Okay? If you go out there and you kill the diversity in the soil life, what will happen? The plants will show it. They'll show it very, very quickly. Okay? So in my garden then, what I want to do is I want to put forms of minerals in the soil that are very slow release. All right? For potassium, what I like is something called green sand. Green sand is actually a green sand from New Jersey. It's a deposit, like a mineral deposit from the ocean. And green sand, the nice thing about green sand is yes, it's high in potassium, but it's got a lot of trace minerals. Okay, there's 90 different minerals, 93, 94, I forget what the exact number is, of different minerals in ocean water. Okay? When you take things like kelp, seaweed or kelp, you've got 60, 70 different kinds of minerals. Do you realize that the fragrance of a flower is dependent on certain minerals? The color of your flowers, if you're a flower grower, if you're an herb grower, there are nuances to the flavors of herbs that you're not going to experience unless you've got certain minerals present. And, if you put too much of a mineral in, you can cause a lot of problem. Okay? If our beets, I'm going to teach you, and in fact, I'm going to be teaching everybody the secret to my super sweet beets. You want to hear what it is? I teach this commonly, so it's not that big of a deal. It's boron. A plant can't uptake its sugars properly unless it has boron present. So let's say you left here today and you're like, Craig said boron's important. Man, because boron's important, I'm going to make sure I got enough boron. You order a dump truck load of boron. And this huge truck backs up your garden, dumps this huge dump truck load of boron in the garden. You spread it out. Man, there aren't going to be any beets sweeter than my beets this year. You've just decimated that piece of ground. Nothing's going to grow there for the next 1,000 years. Okay? You might as well forget about it. Now, so everything's got to be in balance. And you know how you ensure balance? You got to catch this. Don't miss this. How do you ensure balance? Life in the soil. Life in the soil. Do you know what? Those microbes know how to feed the plants. Those plants know how to have a symbiotic relationship with them. All right, let's say that this little remote here is a rock, a little stone in your soil. And a mushroom root hair, the mycelia, remember I called it mycelia, that mushroom root hair comes over here to that rock and it attaches itself to the side of that rock. Do you know what a mushroom has the ability to do? Extract minerals out of a rock. They have acids, okay? And these acids they secrete, and that acid wears away at that rock. And see, this mushroom's really smart. The reason this mushroom is smart is there are plants out there that do something called photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is when the sun shines on the leaves of that plant, and what do they create from that sunshine? Sugars and carbohydrates and things like that, right? But what can't a mushroom do? Can't photosynthesize. I mean, it's pretty impressive. You go out mushroom hunting, one day you go through the woods, you don't see any, the next day you got mushrooms this big. How did that happen? I mean, it's like you turned away and all of a sudden, boom, it's there. Mushrooms have an unbelievable ability to pump water, don't they? So it'd be really nice to have something that could pump water like that attached to your plant, huh? So this mushroom can go up to this rock, and this mushroom's like, you know what? I'm really in need of some sugar right now. I need a sugar fix, okay? But the only way I'm going to get my sugar fix is if I have something to barter. This is a bartering thing. It's a mutual symbiotic relationship, but it's a bartering thing. So this mushroom goes up to that rock, and the plant has informed this mushroom, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. There's a communication going on in the soil that we can't even begin to fathom. The plant has let this mushroom know that it has need of a certain mineral. That mushroom extracts it out of a rock, and you know what? These minerals can be extracted yards, great distances from where it's at. Some of these mats of mycelia, these mushroom colonies, can stretch acres and acres and acres. And there are nutrients being cycled out of fields into forests and from forests into fields because of this colonization of all these mushrooms. And all this information is going around of what's needed in these plants. And that mushroom goes out, it gets the minerals that are needed, it transports them to that plant root, and that plant root is allowed that mushroom root hair to actually go up and come right in to its root. And when that mushroom secretes those needed minerals, you know what happens? That plant secretes those needed sugars. And there's this simultaneous symbiotic flow that takes place. Now throw a fungicide into that and tell me what you're going to do. You're going to kill it.
So does the rock pull stuff out of the soil?
Okay, now she asked, does the rock pull stuff out of the soil? The beautiful thing about the rock is the rock contains it. So any soil, just over time, just from weather and just sunshine and all that goes on in life, those rocks are going to weather over time. And as they weather, those minerals are being released. The way I mineralize my soils with rock powders. If you don't have life in your soil, you don't want to use rock powders. They won't do anything for you. If you got life in your soil, use rock powders and you'll be amazed what they'll do. So what I do is I take things called rock phosphate. So they have phosphorus. Some rocks have high amounts of phosphorus. So what I do then is I take these rock powders and I apply them to the soil. One of my favorite for Michigan soils is colloidal rock phosphate. Colloidal is a really silty clay type rock phosphate. And I like to put clay in my soil because I got a real sandy soil. Okay? So by adding these rock powders to my soil, and by making sure I've got lots of life in my soil, guess what happens? Those rock powders stay there for as long as I need them to. Elliot Coleman, when he first taught me through his books, he puts his rock powders on quadra-annually. That means every 4 years. You've got a savings account, is what you've got. You take those powders, you put them on the soil, you mix them in, you make sure you nurture life and you feed the life of the soil, and you've got what you need in your savings account all the time. And you'll know over time when you need to reapply again. Now, I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to take some questions, and I'll No? All right, 10 minutes to talk and then take questions. Very good. Very good. Now, let me say this, and this is going to segue into the pests somewhat. Okay? When a plant becomes stressed, the ratio of carbon and nitrogen change in its leaf. If you got a really, and don't lose me on this, follow me because this is huge again, okay? When you got a really healthy plant, that really healthy plant has more carbon. A diseased plant, a stressed plant, a plant that's struggling is very high in nitrogen. Nitrogen, a nitrogen intense plant is like candy to a pest. Now, if you were to come to my garden about 3 or 4 years ago, we had a really droughty summer, and I was having to be pretty selective of what I could spend time watering. And I had 2 kinds of kale. I had red Russian kale and Toscano kale, and they were gorgeous. These plants were unbelievable. The flavor was unbelievable. They were just beautiful, beautiful plants. But I decided that I was only going to take time to water one of the kales. And my favorite kale is that Toscano kale, that black Tuscan kale. Okay? So I let off watering that red Russian kale. Within 2 weeks of not watering that kale in that drought, it was being decimated by aphids. In 2 weeks, once it got stressed, the scents went out into the air, literally, and let the insects know, I am dying, come and compost me. And I am not being facetious.
Right.
If you want disease in your life, get stressed. No, yeah. If you meet someone that's got a huge high stress level, guess what's coming? That's a fact of life. You got to learn. Stress at a level is good. In the biosphere that they did years ago, where they contained in that huge bubble people and all these animals and this whole ecosystem, they went in there after they had done that experiment. You could walk up to the oak tree in biosphere, bring a branch right off it. Why? It had never been stressed by wind. You need stress in your life, but you need the right kind of stress in your life, and you need the right amount of stress in your life. There's a balance to everything. But if you stress a plant, if you allow a plant not to have the water it needs, not to have the soil life it needs to feed it, not to have the minerals present for the soil life to feed the plant, or whatever kind of stresses, wind, too much wind at the wrong time, a new seedling going out, if you do that, what's going to happen is you're signaling to pest and disease that you got to come and clean this up. The soil is in more need. At that moment, that plant was signaling to nature, the soil right here is in more need of my organic matter and my minerals to nurture the next plant and I'm not going to be able to produce seed. So rot me down, nurture this soil so that the next thing that gets planted will have a better chance. That's what's happening. So if you want to have super high quality food, then you have to make sure that you keep plants nurtured at all times, or pest and disease are going to come in. So, do we want to call it good there, and then we'll pick up from there?